An 85-year-old man was murdered and another man in his 20s seriously injured in a terror attack near the Hatishbi junction near the northern Israeli city of Yokneam. According to the police, the terrorist, an Arab Israeli citizen named as 26-year-old Karim Jabarin, rammed his vehicle into several people waiting at a bus stop and then exited his car, stabbing a soldier and stealing his weapon, opening fire on cars driving by. The victim was driving in the car with his son when the terrorist opened fire. Border police officers who were driving by the scene stopped their vehicle and neutralized the terrorist. Magen David Adom said paramedics arriving on the scene began providing medical treatment, but were forced to pronounce him dead on the scene. His son was forced to witness his father's death and sustained light injuries. The soldier was evacuated to the hospital and remains in serious condition. May his memory be for a blessing. And Israel is intensifying and expanding its military pressure campaign on Hamas and sending reinforcements to Gaza. Overnight, the IDF eliminated a senior Hamas official in a targeted strike. Meanwhile, Egypt is trying to advance a new hostages deal. All the details in the following report. The IDF has released footage of tanks and armored vehicles amassing along the Gaza border. The message is clear. Israel intends to intensify its military operations in the Gaza Strip against Hamas. On Sunday night, the IDF and Israel's security agency carried out a targeted strike on a senior Hamas terrorist hiding inside the Nasser hospital compound in Khan Yunis. Defense Minister Israel Katz confirmed the target was Ismail Balhoum, a senior political figure in Hamas reportedly acting in the capacity of prime minister. He was killed just days after his predecessor. The IDF said it used extensive intelligence and precise munitions to reduce harm to civilians. Balhoum was reportedly receiving medical treatment for injuries sustained in a previous strike. The IDF has accused Hamas of using Nasser Hospital as a base for terror operations and has released information highlighting the known positions of Hamas operatives and weapons located inside the hospital, in clear violation of international law. Balhoum is the fourth senior Hamas member to be eliminated in the span of 24 hours. The IDF and Israel Security Agency also announced they had eliminated two of Hamas's top military commanders. Ahmad Salman Shimali, deputy commander of Hamas's Gaza brigade, who played a central role in planning and preparing the October 7th massacre, and Jamil Omar Jamil Wadia, commander of the Sajaya battalion, who was responsible for attacks on Israeli troops and previously oversaw the 2011 anti-tank missile strike on a yellow school bus that killed a 16-year-old child. Meanwhile, amid the fighting, hostage deal negotiations are reportedly ongoing behind the scenes, with Egypt proposing a new deal. According to the Associated Press, Egypt has proposed the release of 5 hostages in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian terrorists. So far, however, a deal remains elusive as Hamas has refused to release more hostages, and Israel is determined to intensify its operations against the terrorist group. Meanwhile, Israeli media is reporting large amounts of residents in Gaza have left the war-torn enclave since March. ILTV's Shosh Bedrosian is in the southern Israel, about 13 miles from the border of Gaza, with the details.
People who live close to the border here in Israel are fully aware of the renewed but limited ground operations happening inside of the Gaza Strip. But something that might surprise people is a new report here in Israeli media is suggesting that hundreds of people inside of Gaza voluntarily want to leave the Gaza Strip. A new Channel 12 report in Israel suggests since the beginning of March, more than 1,000 people have left the Gaza Strip. They also report a total of 35,000 Gazans have requested to leave the enclave since the beginning of the war, with an average of 200 to 300 people requesting to leave every week. Channel 12 reports that if a Gazan is set to leave the region, they are transferred from their homes to a specific gathering point where they go through an inspection at the Kerem Shalom crossing. They then continue to their final destination through the Rafah crossing in Gaza or Ramon Airport. Right now, Gazans and their families who need medical treatment and residents with destination visas are allowed to leave the Gaza Strip, according to the Channel 12 report. But right now, the agreement between Israel and Hamas suggests any patient who leaves can go with one family member. The report suggests an additional 600 people are expected to leave the Gaza Strip by the end of this week.
Thank you, Shush. And of course, there is U.S. President Trump's plan to relocate the Gazan population, or at least allow those who want to leave to leave. According to reports, the U.S. is still searching for a country willing to take in the Palestinians. Perhaps those rushing to recognize a Palestinian state or speak out against Israel's defensive actions in Gaza should open their doors and have Palestinians come live as their neighbors. And joining us now with more on the latest strikes and expansion of the military campaign in Gaza is Brigadier General in the Reserves Israel Shafir, a combat pilot and former commander of Israel's largest Air Force base. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So with the collapse of the ceasefire and renewed fighting in Gaza, will this second round of combat be any different than what we've previously seen?
Not much, because we're still talking about Hamas terrorists or activists who are within the local population, hiding either in the tunnels or amid the refugee camps, tent camps spread throughout Gaza. So a very careful and meticulous effort will be made to make sure that there's a minimal collateral damage while chasing Hamas operatives. So I don't expect that it will look much different than before, unfortunately.
And the IDF has indicated it's seeking to expand its ground invasion into Gaza, with soldiers already operating throughout the Strip. In the first round of fighting, the Air Force struck hundreds of Hamas targets. What is the Air Force's role in this renewed fighting? And are there still viable targets left for the Air Force to strike?
Well, let's delve into that a little bit. The exchange ratios of killed between the IDF and Hamas is about 40-1. I'm talking about Hamas terrorists and not collateral damage. And that is done by the fact that the units that go in are actually helped by UAVs hovering above, clearing the way, looking at any potential dangerous Hamas, either personnel or booby traps and things of that nature, and taking them out as much as they can. They're also using quadcopters within buildings and even within tunnels that relay back information. So we're talking about high-tech and aerial support that helps the ground soldiers as they advance through to make sure that their safety comes first and decrease the possibility of being hit by Hamas. It doesn't always work. It's not a 100% security, but it really reduces the threat. And the slow movement that we saw in the previous time that will be repeated again is the one that promises that you can take that area, analyze it, get through without getting too many fatalities along the way.
You know, in the last 24 hours, we saw numerous eliminations of senior Hamas terrorists by the IAF. Can you share with us what goes into an operation like this?
Well, the basis of this is information and intelligence. The intelligence of those that we seek to hit is actually relayed, as you can imagine, by people on the ground that are not, they may not be particularly fond of us, but they're less fond of Hamas than they are of us. And that information leads us to where those operatives are, even if they're hiding in a hospital. Next thing that happens is can we take that person out in a hospital without collateral damage? So create a scenario where that particular person is secluded from others and use a minimal amount of munition, a minimal munition I would say, a small weight munition delivered from a UAV or from an airplane to for a precise hit within about 3 to 4 feet of the target, even if you have to go through the roof. And the munition that explodes has very little explosives in it, so that anyone within few feet may get hurt, but not further than that. And that is actually what happened yesterday.
All right, well, Brigadier General Israel Shafir, thank you so much for your insights and for joining us today.
Thank you.
And the Trump administration is placing the blame for failed ceasefire negotiations solely on Hamas. In an interview Sunday night, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said he was duped by the terrorist group and reiterated U.S. support for Israel. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke on the phone with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. All the details in the following report. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff unequivocally blamed Hamas for the collapse of the ceasefire for hostages deal in an interview Sunday night with Fox News.
I thought we had a deal, an acceptable deal. I even thought we had an approval from Hamas. Maybe that's just me getting duped. But I thought we were there. And evidently we weren't. So this is on Hamas. The United States stands with the state of Israel. There's just, that's a 100% commitment. And we've expressed that. Hamas had every opportunity to demilitarize, to accept the bridging proposal that would have given us a 40 or 50-day ceasefire where we could have discussed demilitarization and a final truce. There were all kinds of opportunities to do that, and they elected not to.
Witkoff's bridging proposal, presented earlier in March, sought to extend the ceasefire in Gaza into April, beyond the holidays of Ramadan and Passover, to allow more time for negotiations. Despite this, Witkoff said the U.S. would be amenable to a reach-out from Hamas, though adding that we need to be clear who the aggressor is here, and that is Hamas. Trump's special envoy also addressed the Iranian threat, saying that the Islamic Republic of Iran cannot and will not gain access to a nuclear weapon, and said he hopes the U.S. and Iran can reach the right place through diplomacy. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke on the phone Sunday evening. According to statements from the Prime Minister's office and the U.S. State Department spokesperson, the two discussed Israel's military operations in Gaza, efforts to release the hostages, and regional threats. Secretary Rubio reaffirmed U.S. support for Israel and emphasized the Trump administration's commitment to restoring freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, including action against the Iranian-backed Houthi forces. And the Israeli government has unanimously voted to seek the dismissal of Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara. The decision follows months of tensions and accusations that the Attorney General is impeding the government's ability to implement policies. ILTV's Ariella Lachiani reports.
The Israeli government has taken a dramatic and unprecedented step by voting unanimously to dismiss Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara. This decision, pushed forward by Justice Minister Yariv Levin, follows months of tension between the Attorney General and the government over proposed judicial reforms and other policies. Levin accused Baharav Miara of refusing to cooperate with the government, obstructing legislation, and neglecting her duties by declining to attend committee meetings and failing to represent the government's position in court. He claimed her conduct has severely impacted the government's ability to function effectively and implement policies. Baharav Miara responded by arguing that the government is attempting to undermine her role and operate without legal checks and balances. She insisted her job is to ensure the government acts within the boundaries of the law and labelled the no-confidence motion against her as lacking legal validity. The move has drawn widespread criticism from opposition leaders who have questioned its legality and accused the government of attempting to exert control over the judiciary. Meanwhile, public protests against the decision have erupted across the country, reflecting growing concern over the independence of Israel's legal system. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not participate in the vote due to a conflict of interest, given his ongoing corruption trial and the Attorney General's role as a state's chief prosecutor. While the Cabinet's vote marks the initial phase of Baharav Miara's potential dismissal, the process is expected to take several weeks and will likely face legal challenges. As the government moves forward, the controversy highlights deeper tensions over the balance of power between Israel's executive branch and its judicial system.
And joining us now with more on the internal atmosphere and tensions here in Israel is JNS CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief Alex Trayman. Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Widar, thanks for having me.
So I want to start by asking you to maybe, describe for our viewers the atmosphere in Israel now that there's a return to war, now that there's renewed missile fire. What are people feeling with regards to the end of the ceasefire?
Well, I think that there's a little bit of confusion and there's definitely some tension. When the ceasefires were declared both in Lebanon and in Gaza, there was a general understanding that the war gains had been extremely significant, but the war may not be over. At the same time, Israelis don't want to be fighting wars. If they can get a victory without going back to war, then that would certainly be the preference. And Israelis also were willing to pause in order to bring back the hostages. I do believe that Israelis understand that it is Hamas holding hostages, and this is the only cards that they really have against Israel. The Trump administration is giving Israel a green light to end the ceasefire, and so there is a reluctant understanding that in order to finish the job against Hamas, that a return to war is probably the most important thing to do right now.
And, not just tensions from without, but also a lot of political tensions within. Can you maybe break it down for us? The government is seeking to dismiss both the head of the Shin Bet and the Attorney General. Why now?
Well, I think that the timing is a question that everybody has as to why now, but it does seem specifically with the head of the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, that a significant amount of distrust has really bubbled over with Prime Minister Netanyahu really not able to count or rely on the head of the security services. The head of security services, this is a direct report to the prime minister. We saw a few months ago that Netanyahu fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant. We saw that just a few weeks ago, Herzi Halevi, the chief of staff, resigned. And Ronen Bar himself had indicated that he was likely to step down from his post. But Ronen Bar wanted to be the one who decided who his successor was going to be. The prime minister wants to make sure that he gets a successor that is someone that he wants. Meanwhile, the attorney general factors into all of this because she has been constantly blocking the executive moves as well as legislation passed by this government, and she would have what to say about Netanyahu's firing of Ronen Bar, and so Netanyahu is moving finally to get her out. I think from Netanyahu's perspective and his supporters' perspective, the move to fire Gali Baharav Miara, the Attorney General, is months too late. It probably should have been done at the very beginning of this current government.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has said this week that the deep state is operating in Israel. What's your analysis of this statement?
Well, I think everybody can see in the United States that President Trump is taking aim at what he calls the deep state. In America, trying to drain the swamp, essentially, to go after the establishment in all areas of government. And obviously, Netanyahu is being met with a significant amount of internal opposition here. And I believe that Netanyahu is just trying to mirror the same language that President Trump is using, because President Trump is probably looking at what's going on in Israel and wondering, what's going on over here? Why is it that Netanyahu, who's seemingly led the war very successfully so far, why is he meeting so much opposition at home? And I do believe that Netanyahu is just trying to use language that Trump understands so that Trump will maintain his support for Netanyahu. Trump's support is the biggest card that Netanyahu has in terms of maintaining popular support.
Mm-hmm. We're hearing more and more talk in Israel that Israel is heading towards civil war. It's a very concerning statement, especially considering all the threats Israel faces. Now this threat from within. Is this a real possibility in your opinion?
I think it's absolutely insidious. It's really disgusting that you have members of the opposition, even some heads of major. Former Supreme Court justices, former prime ministers stating that Israel's headed toward a civil war. I don't think there's anybody in Israel that wants a civil war. I mean, this type of discourse that we heard during the judicial reform protests and also in the during the election cycles. Remember, we had 5 consecutive elections in about 5 years that was used by the anti-Netanyahu protesters then calling for civil war. I mean, there's no place for that in Israeli society, and I think it's a strong indication to people that are watching and trying to figure out what side to be on. One side is calling for unity. They might not be doing what is necessary to achieve total unity. The other side is calling for civil war. And these are not new cries. These are the same cries that we heard in August preceding October 7th. I believe most Israelis understand that discourse actually gave the enemies of the Jewish people a sense that Israel was vulnerable to attack. I don't think that anybody here really wants to see mass protests, and I don't think anybody here wants to see a civil war by any means.
Absolutely. Well, Alex Trayman, thank you so much for your insights and for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And in other news, Columbia University is under pressure to make sweeping changes following accusations of anti-Semitic violence during campus protests. As the once prestigious institution attempts to regain $400 million in federal funding, tensions over free speech and student safety are hitting a boiling point. ILTV's Ariella Luciani reports.
Recent developments at Columbia University are making waves in the ongoing struggle over anti-Semitism and free speech on American college campuses. In response to demands from the Trump administration, the Ivy League institution has announced a ban on face masks during protests and a comprehensive review of its admissions practices. The move comes after the administration cut $400 million in federal funding, primarily aimed at science research, accusing the university of failing to protect Jewish students from what is described as anti-Semitic violence and harassment during pro-Palestinian protests on campus. The crackdown follows a series of heated demonstrations that began after the Israel-Hamas war on October 7, 2023, and escalated when Columbia became the first university to host a pro-Palestinian encampment, sparking a movement across the U.S. In a bid to regain funding, Columbia University is not only implementing the mask ban, but also hiring dozens of police officers with the authority to arrest students on campus. Additionally, a new provost will oversee the Middle East, South Asian, and African Studies Department, which will be under special supervision for at least 5 years. Interim President Katrina Armstrong reaffirmed the university's commitment to academic freedom and free expression, while also acknowledging the institution's challenges and pledging resilience. But critics argue the federal government's intervention is an inappropriate infringement on university autonomy, while pro-Israel students maintain that the measures are crucial for ensuring Jewish safety on campus. With over 60 other universities warned of similar action, all eyes are on Columbia as it implements these significant changes.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Clear skies are expected around most of the country tonight, with temperatures reaching lows of around 12 degrees Celsius or 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll see cloudy skies alongside steady temperatures with highs of about 24 degrees Celsius or 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels, subscribe to our newsletter, and explore our website, iltv.tv. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Ladar Gavelazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching.